Okay friends, it's time to get started on replacing our valve cover gasket. To do that, we need to access it. Let's go ahead and get this plastic cover out of the way by removing these two 10mm headed nuts. Sometimes the whole stud comes out with it, that's okay. Go ahead and grab onto this cover, inspect it, set it aside. Now with that out of the way, we have a nice clear view of our ignition coils. Let's start unplugging those. To do that, just squeeze right where my thumb is right here. There's a little tab. Remove it. You always want to inspect every electrical connector. If you see any funny colors, it's probably corrosion and it needs to be dealt with. This one looks good, so I'll just go ahead and set it aside for now. Let's continue down the line and do all of these. Okay. Let's go ahead and set this off to the side over here, being careful not to damage anything. Now we're going to continue with our 10mm. We're going to start removing all of our ignition coils. There's something to pay attention to on this. You want to make sure that when you take them out, you put them in the specific area so that they're going to be in a very specific order. This one right here has to go back into this exact same spot. You don't want to just go ahead and switch them around all willy-nilly. Just going to put this right up here. Continue with your 10mm right here. Just going to take this bolt, I'll put it right back in there. Continue over to here. Generally with these, you can just kind of squeeze on them and then you can pull the hose right off. If it feels like the hose is stuck on there, it's probably dry and brittle. That's very common. You can just try to use a pick and get underneath there. Let's see if we can get this clamp out of the way. Okay. Inspect the hose, make sure it's not dry rotted and cracked like this one right here. Technically, this should be replaced, but that's a story for another day. I'll just go ahead and set this aside. Now we're going to move along to the other side of the valve cover. We have another 10mm headed bolt right here. It should hold this plastic on there. This one's already broken, but we'll just go ahead and remove it anyway. Okay. Now like before, I would just put the bolt back in there just so I can remember where it goes. You can pull that aside, continue on to this hose, give it a little squeeze, slide that clamp out of the way. Sometimes it doesn't just come off of there. Just go ahead and pull it right off the valve cover. Once again, quick inspection, set it aside. Now let's use a blowgun and try to blow off any debris that's in the area. Watch your eyes. With everything blown clean, the next thing that we're going to do is move along to removing our mounting bolts and nuts. You're going to find that you have several coming across the front. There's going to be some coming across the rear. We're going to want to make sure that we remove them all. You're also going to find that you have a couple right in the center right there. Go ahead and set that aside. Now these two center bolts are much different than the other bolts, and you'll also notice that they have a washer on them. You need to make sure that they retain that washer. Let's go ahead and set all this aside, and then we can start removing our valve cover from the engine. Let's go ahead and try to lift this up. If for some reason it didn't want to lift up, it's probably just kind of stuck on there very lightly. You can go ahead and use a rubber mallet and just give it a couple loving bonks. You don't want to hit it very hard and potentially break any of the mounting hardware or the valve cover itself. Carefully lift this up and out of here, being very careful not to dump any dirt or sand into that engine. We can turn this over and we can start removing our valve cover gasket. To do that, you're just going to kind of come up and along like this. And now we can clean our valve cover. To clean the valve cover, a couple things that you want to pay attention to. You're going to use a parts cleaner, and you of course want to make sure that you have hand and eye protection at all times, and you're going to want to do it over a nice collection receptacle. That way there you can recycle the fluid when you're done. When you're cleaning this, you're going to notice that there's this little baffle area right along here, and there is a possibility that fluid could get trapped up inside there, and it would want to try to make its way out of this PCV area right here. So you're just going to want to go ahead and spray it from all angles, turn it over, turn it around, and of course if you had that air gun that we were using before to try to blow out everything, just try to remove any of the cleaning solvent that you have in there. Now, obviously, I could have spent another half an hour trying to clean out the majority of this, but I'm really not that worried about it. I'm just going to go ahead and blow dry it. Now, once you have the valve cover cleaned up, we're going to move along to cleaning up the engine. There's going to be some things that you want to pay attention to. You have the areas in the center right here where your spark plugs are going to go. There's supposed to be a gasket that comes along here, so you need to make sure it's free and clear of any debris. All these circles along here. You're also going to have the main area where the majority of your gasket's going to go. It's going to come all the way along this area and then circles all the way around. There's something to think about with that. Right along this area right here, this area is called your timing chain cover. It's very important to pay attention to this because there's actually two areas. You have the area with the main part of the engine, and then you also have the area with the cover. And in between the two, there's a little crack right along here. So you're probably going to see that you have a little bit of gasket maker along this area. You want to make sure that you clean up these areas. There's also one on this side. And once they're clean, we're going to have to go ahead and put a little bit of gasket maker on here, or RTV, call it whatever you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a nice flat razor blade right here, and I'm going to try to scrape down this area. As I scrape it, I'm trying to scrape away from the inside of the engine, essentially trying to scrape things away so it doesn't fall into the engine itself. We'll do this whole area, we'll do the center area, and then of course we'll pay special attention to these areas here. So now for this area right here, I'm just going to use my flat razor blade. Just try to skim this right up. Pull it right out and away from the engine. Now at this point you have a nice clear view of that crack right there. Just going to make sure that I get it as clean as possible. I want to make sure that my new gasket maker can fit in there and it's going to adhere perfectly. Now the next thing I like to do is just use a little bit of parts cleaner on a nice clean fresh rag, and then I'm just going to wipe down the entire engine area where the valve cover is going to ride, especially in the two areas along these areas right here where we're going to have gasket maker. This is very important. Make sure you get these center areas as well. You don't want these to leak. Now we're going to move along to installing our gasket on our valve cover. Just go ahead and lay this out. You can start wherever you want. Usually I start with the center area here. Just go ahead and start pressing them in. Make sure it's completely inside. If it seems like it's kind of hanging out a little bit, there's a possibility your gasket's not going to be sitting properly and you're going to have an oil leak and it's going to make a big mess. Come along here. Just kind of pressing this in all the way. I'll continue going around after I get it installed. That way there I can just make sure that it's completely installed properly. Okay, so that looks good. Just make your way around one more time. Double check the entire way around. Now we're going to set this aside for 1 second. Now let's take some gasket maker. We're going to come along each of these cracks. Just put a nice little goo ball going across these. You want it to be fairly thick. essentially so it can take up that crack and you don't have to worry about oil seeping its way out through. You want to make sure that the RTV that you use or gasket maker that you use is going to be oil resistant. Now at this point we're going to take our valve cover, and I always just like to try to turn it over and make sure that the gasket doesn't try to fall off. This one looks like it's still good, so we can continue on by taking it. We're going to gently slide it up and over the engine here, line up the corresponding studs with their holes here, and then just carefully try to bring it down. As we bring it down, make sure all of your wiring is out of the way. There's nothing in between the engine and the valve cover itself. That looks good. Let's start with the center bolts here. Start these in. Now we can move along to the outer bolts and nuts. We're essentially just going to start all of them before we start snugging any of them up. Now let's move along to bottoming out all of our bolts. We're going to start with the center two, and then we're going to come in here, start with the center, and work our way towards the outer portion. Now let's continue on to tightening up both of the center bolts here to 10 foot-pounds. And then we'll continue with all the rest of the bolts and mounting nuts to 8 foot-pounds. Start in the center here again. Start connecting in these hoses here. You definitely want to make sure that you re-clamp these back on. If you lose the clamp or it doesn't seem like it has enough spring retention, you want to use something such as maybe a wire tie or even another clamp. Make sure that's tight. This is the part that was broken for us, but it's essentially going to be the same thing. Just go ahead and line it up, put in your bolt, snug it up. Here, squeeze that clamp. Try to line the clamp up back with where it originally came from. Now we can start installing our coils for this. Just put a little bit of silicone paste along this area here, and then sometimes people like to put a little bit up along this area. This is going to help keep moisture out of there, and it's going to help make it easier to remove in the future. And slide it down, wiggle it around. I'm just going to do them all. Like I said, I put them all in their specific order so I know exactly where they came from. Torque all these to 80 inch-pounds. Go ahead and grab onto that wiring. Start installing it here. Essentially, you just want to go ahead and press these in, listen for a click, give it a nice tug, make sure it's secure. You definitely do not want these to loosen up while you're driving. You'll find that you have a misfire and a running condition. Tuck in all of your wiring. Maybe. Okay friends, we got our valve cover gasket installed. What's left to do now Now you're going to want to make sure that you do a proper oil change with the manufacturer's specified oil. Of course, you're also going to want to make sure that you replace the oil filter. After that, go ahead and take your vehicle for a road test. Listen for any funny noises and make sure you don't get a check engine light. Thanks.